let's wait for the slides. But hey everyone, good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here and talk about my passion, which is the art of science communication. So while we're waiting, how about who are among here are familiar with science communication, apart from what Miss Ingrid has shared? So science communication encompasses a lot of things, and it's really amazing how even me, as a computer science major, I have experience being an advocate for science communication. Thank you. All right, so next slide, please. So a little background about me of why I'm talking in front is I have been a UX specialist in a Singaporean company and a marketing copywriter in Hong Kong. And right now, I'm interning as a machine learning intern at Thinking Machines. Next slide, please. And in terms of science communication, I have been the science and tech editor for the UP Parser, our high school newspaper. And in college, in Department of Computer Science, Diliman, I have been the associate editor, where we forefront all of the explaining computer science concepts to layman terms to the society. So for example, there are a lot of current AI revolutions right now. We try to explain it. Why is it relevant to the society? And we try to explain it in the most layman terms that even a tricycle driver will be able to explain, will be able to understand. Next slide, please. And while my experiences may be off tangent, I became a machine learning intern, I became a copywriter, a UX specialist, and a science communicator. All of these have helped me create the foundations to be able to share with you how to design engaging science communication strategies. Next slide, please. So when I was a kid, I loved stories, and I would never get tired of listening stories over and over again. And that's when I realized that science communication, we need storytelling embedded within it. So by telling a story and embedding science within it, it will be able to help communicate very intrinsic and very complicated scientific concepts to the society. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to discuss 4 elements of effective science communication strategy. And first is knowing your audience. Second is identifying your message. Third is choosing an actual communication channel. And fourth is incorporating visuals. Next slide, please. So step 1, knowing your audience. So next slide. So we know that effective science communication is not a one-size-fits-all. So it all depends on the target audience of who you're targeting. So for example, if your target are students, so for example, you're a student researcher who wants to share your research paper to your co-student, it will be a different strategy compared to if you're explaining your research to a panel of judges of researchers. So next slide, please. So a strategy or a tool that we can use in order to tailor our scientific concepts to a tailored audience is through user persona. So a user persona is a fictional character that represents a specific type of audience member. So by studying your audience and being able to identify who are you really talking to, then you'll be able to create a targeted and very tailored message. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a user persona. So user persona includes the bio, who are you really talking to, their needs, their frustrations, and free time. So for example, for students, an example of a frustration for us is we want to learn something scientific, but a lot of content are long form. We don't have time for long form content. We're now used to short form content. And for example, for older generations, they may prefer text-based versus a video-based because they're able to keep track easier. So next slide, please. But how do we get the data to create the user persona? And that is through user research. User research is the process of gathering information about your audience in order to better understand their needs, preferences, behaviors, and motivations. Next slide. And there are different methods to user research. For example, surveys, conducting interviews, focus groups, and observation. Next slide. So in order to be able to craft your message, before even sending it, you need to be able to understand what is the general theme of your message. And in order to do that, we need to identify what message are we going to say to the target audience. Next slide, please. And the message is basically the key idea or takeaway that you want your audience to remember after hearing your science communication. So during campaigns, electoral campaigns, there are a lot of jingles that you guys hear. And there are some certain phrases that you would, parang na-earworm ka. And that's what we're trying to, that's our goal when we're doing science communication. So when you hear about, for example, COVID, you know social distancing is a keyword associated to it. And that has been association in our brain. It's because of science communication. It has been communicated to us effectively through and through. So that's why we had that association. And now, if you have a research paper, or for example, you're an advocate for science communication and you want to share a message, we need to have that jingle. That thing that once they hear your message, they have an association that, yeah, it's about this. Next slide, please. So how do you identify your message? So there are four things. First is, what is the main idea or finding of your research? Always go back to the core of what is the main finding of it and why is it relevant to the audience. Then third is, how does it connect to their interest or values? Having an emotional connection to something is really important. So for example, for a lot of COVID-related infographics, if you had a family member or a friend who had a COVID lately or died from COVID, then you will have more emotional connection towards information regarding COVID. And lastly, what do you want your audience to think as a result of hearing your message or the action to it? So of course, we're not just sharing information about science, but we want to have an action after it. We want to drive them to do something in compared to your message. So we're not just passive listeners, but we want to be an active listener and active doer. And we need, as science communicators, we have a part to take in order to drive people to do an action. Next slide, please. And lastly, a third is choosing your communication channels. Next slide, please. So there's a such thing as information diets. It's basically the kind of information you're consuming and where you're getting it from. So a lot of our generation today, we get our information from Twitter, Instagram. And for the other generations, they get it from YouTube. And for others, they get it from podcasts and blogs. Next slide, please. And it's very important in choosing what platform you're going to use in order to share your scientific message. So choose channels that allow you to present your message in a way that's engaging and memorable to your audience. So different types of scientific concepts require different types of channel. So if it's a more intrinsic and more deeper scientific concept, blogs are better, or long-form YouTube videos. But if you're targeting a younger audience, then maybe Reels or TikTok will be a better platform. Next slide, please. And of course, lastly, we're gonna incorporate visuals. Next slide, please. So there are different types of visuals that science communicators use. One is infographics, illustrations, animations, and data visualizations. I think the most common one that a lot of scientific organizations do is infographics, which is, there are a lot of templates on Canva actually on creating scientific infographics. So it's been easier for a lot of organizations to create one. Next slide, please. And And of course, I'm going to talk about how to actually design very effective visuals for science communication. Next slide. So tip number 1 is to determine what do you want to show. So there are different types of charts for different purposes. So if you want to visualize composition, it's best to use pie graphs. If you want to establish comparisons, then it's best to use bar graphs. And if you want to show relationships, maybe a regression line or a heat map. So you have to understand what kind of data do you have and how will you represent it in the most effective way. Next slide, please. And of course, write meaningful chart titles and labels. So always make sure that the title provides the overview of the chart's information, and make sure that you have relevant axis labels to identify the variables, and of course, using colors to highlight important data. Next slide, please. And of course, increasing data to pixel ratio. So a well-designed chart conveys meaningful visual information. So it's not clear here, but in the left side, there's a lot of going on. There's like a lot of lines, a lot of labels. So make sure that the graph only has the relevant information so that the user or the audience will not have information overload, that they would rather not even read your infograph. Next slide, please. And of course, use labels to eliminate legends. So a lot of people I see in infographics is that they use legends to identify this color identifies this rates of COVID cases in a certain country. But the best way is to eliminate legends because it breaks the eye cycle. So our eyes are usually moving from left to right. And if you have a legend below, they'll be going from up to bottom, then up again. And it breaks the natural way of reading and natural way of how we visually gather information in our brains. So it's best to use labels instead of legends so that we'll be able to help them better understand the concepts that you want to explain. Next slide, please. And of course, using appropriate color palettes. We don't want a rainbow color palette or some random colors that don't have any relationships. So we can use divergent color palettes to highlight relationships that has low or high values. And we can also use sequential color palettes if we want to depict data that goes from relatively low to relatively high. Next slide, please. So just a recap, these are the 4 science communication strategies that we will do. And next slide, I will run you through an example of a very effective science communication strategy. So we will be applying how these 4 elements are utilized in order to share this very exciting data. So as I have mentioned a while ago, I have been a machine learning intern at Thinking Machines. And at Thinking Machines, we use AI and machine learning in a lot of things. So how to help the Philippines, and one of those is how we can understand poverty in the Philippines better using artificial intelligence. So we created a blog post on it. Next slide, please. So using the 4 elements, first is knowing your audience. So of course, first we identified who are we creating this blog post for. So there are usually 4 audiences in the Facebook page. So one is there are people who want to learn more about AI. Second is software engineers who want to know how to incorporate AI into their projects. Third is, since Thinking Machines is a consulting firm, data science consulting firm, there are a lot of CTOs who want to know how can they use data to drive their business to higher heights. And of course, there are students like me who are trying to see how I can improve my AI skills and if there are any available internships or if this field is for me. Next slide. Now that we have identified the four user personas, we have also identified what is the core message that we want to get across to these four personas. So the core message is how AI and machine learning techniques can be applied to socio-economic data and other relevant factors to gain insights into the underlying causes, patterns, and potential solutions to alleviate poverty in the country. So while we were crafting our message, this was our core, basically it's like a core value, core mission that by the end of the blog post, we will be able to give this message across to our readers. Next slide. And of course, in the blog article, it wasn't just simply the blog itself. The blog itself was for the first three user personas, the data scientist, software engineer, and the CTO. But of course, we wanted to incorporate visuals. It's before the students, because students need visuals in order to keep their attention. So next slide. So here are examples of visuals that we added. So as you can see, we added labels, proper labels, and we use it. It's very simple. It's very minimalistic. It's not information overload that what is going on here. And there are subheadings to each one of it. Next slide, please. And we incorporated colors. So as you can see, in data science, it's all about how do we present data in the most effective way. And we usually use heat maps. So here, as you can see, this is the result from the AI algorithm of what is the different levels of poverty across the Philippines. So by creating these data, it's able to help us understand, as you can see here, there's a lot of, in the regions, in the Visayas and Mindanao that have high levels of poverty. Meanwhile, in the Luzon area, they're more richer because there are more opportunities and there are different factors. But this is what the AI has generated based on our data. Next slide, please. So yeah, so as you can see, all of these figures are accessible. Accessible meaning even to colorblind people, meaning those people who have they switch colors, like instead of red they see blue. So the colors that we chose in our infographics are colorblind friendly, and it's also very clear. There's no ambiguity. Everything, every pixel, every text has a purpose. They're not just there for aesthetics. They're there for a reason, and of course they're engaging. So you'll be able to engage with the infographics. Like you'll be able to see, also this is what you also be able to gain your own insights from the heat map. Like, hey, that's my province. Like it's colored blue, so maybe that means your province is richer compared to the other regions. Next slide, please. So yeah, and of course there's the blog. The blog itself, we use clear and concise language. So it's the kind of language that even a grade 7 student will be able to understand. So if there are any other highly technical terms, we would explain it, the definition, and yeah, so we always made sure that it's very accessible even to the high school students. Next slide, please. So yeah, we've seen how effective science communication strategy can be used in real time. And yeah, just recap that these 4 elements are important in order to create an effective science communication. And as the previous speaker has mentioned, that there's a big gap right now with science and actual society. And it's our duty as students in order to bridge that gap. We've done a lot of research. 4th-year students, we do research, and we have to ask ourselves, who are we doing research for? So if you're let's say, a bio student who's creating a research for farmers, to help farmers? Do farmers understand your research? For a lot of students, let's say you're creating a traffic traffic system, computer science related research, do jeepney drivers will be able to understand your research? So it's all about who are you doing research for? And that's why I'm encouraging you guys, if you once you do your thesis, make sure that it's simplified, that even your target audience will be able to understand, because they're the ones who will be utilizing your research in the first place. So we want to bridge that gap, and I'm encouraging you guys to start now, even as students. There's a lot of things that you can do. So if you have your family members, they're having hard time understanding scientific concepts, such as COVID policies, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation right now. I want you guys to be a part of the change in the Philippines, that the infodemic will be reduced, and we're at the forefront, we're in the leading universities. So we have a lot of influence in social media and other platforms, so that we'll be able to share the things that we know. Next slide, please. So yeah, so that's my talk. So I want you guys to remember that science communication is not just sharing information. It's all about encouraging them, helping them be curious as well about science, and making them realize that science is a big part of their life. It's not just something that is close within the four walls. Science can be used to improve their life, and it's happening to them in real time. So I want you guys to be a part of that change, that a lot of Filipinos will be able to have higher trust and higher curiosity towards scientific concepts, and we have a part to play. So yeah, that is all.
Thank you so much for that talk, Princess. Tama nga, no, we really need to make people curious, and we also need to ensure that our message is tailored for them nga, to their language, to their background, to their character. Para naman maintindihan nila yung message that we want to come across. Yan. So for our final